Hey there, Agile Tumbleweeds, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bites, the podcast about feelings and other things. It's the podcast put on by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we're building software in an agile manner day in and day out. Cora, tell us what your favorite 80s movie is. It's Top Gun. That is a good movie. But no, today our favorite 80s movie is The Karate Kid with Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita. And in The Karate Kid, the main character, Ralph Macchio, Daniel, he decides he wants to learn karate. The maintenance man at his apartments appears to know karate. He beats up a bunch of children with it. And so Daniel decides to take karate lessons from him. And the way Mr. Miyagi teaches him at first is he has Daniel do all kinds of chores around his own house, around Mr. Miyagi's house. So he has him paint the fence, paintbrush up, paintbrush down, the wax on, wax off. He's waxing the cars and sweeping the floors. And he has Daniel doing all these very repetitive chores, and Daniel's just getting madder and madder and madder. And then one day Daniel just blows up at him, and Mr. Miyagi then demonstrates the whole time Daniel has been learning karate. So he throws some punches at Daniel and asks him to show him, wax on and wax off, and they turn out to be blocks. And, it's this great pivotal moment in the movie when we find out that Mr. Miyagi is not a selfish old crazy person. He's actually this super wise, mystical karate teacher who has been teaching Daniel the whole time. The reason that I bring this movie up is because in many ways, people feel similarly about the way organizations need to be led into greater agility. There's even a specific name for this. It's called Shu-Ha-Ri, or Shahari if you're cool. And it represents sort of 3 stages of development. And it comes from traditional martial arts instruction. Like we see in The Karate Kid, you have the Shu stage, where the person is doing things by rote. They're just taking movements and just repeating the movements over and over and over. They're not allowed to deviate. They're just replicating their instructor's movements over and over and over. And then you get into the Ha stage, where the student has now internalized these movements. They're familiar with them now and can kind of start changing them up a little bit. They start adapting the movements rather to sort of fit them. And then they get to the Re stage, where the techniques sort of fall away. And now the person is operating mostly off of the principles of the art, and they are just doing the techniques that come naturally from those principles that fit them. So they are in effect almost inventing their own martial arts style at that point, their own take on whatever it was they were trained in. And this all sounds really good on paper, right? And we see The Karate Kid and we're very moved by Mr. Miyagi's wisdom. Or we think about this idea of somebody repetitively adhering to a series of movements or a system over and over and over again, and then they have enlightenment, right? And then they get it, and then they internalize it, it becomes part of them. And only after this long period of doing the repetitive movements are they now qualified, or are they now in a position where they can finally understand and appreciate and then start making their own improvements. This is such a common way now to talk about agile transformations that it's almost just conventional wisdom. Like, of course it goes this way. It's just a given, and it's a good way to go, and everyone should do that. But I'm going to push back on that a little bit today. I'm going to put forth the idea that this is maybe not a good way, or not an optimal way, for people and organizations to be led through exercises to bring them greater agility. I'm not even sure it's a great way to teach martial arts, to be honest with you. But let's talk about how this does or doesn't apply to agile transformations. So let's talk about this first stage, where you just have people going through the motions repetitively, or we might say keeping the rules. That's the Shu stage in this progression. Everyone's doing things according to the rules. And it's just kind of conventional wisdom that all teams, or most teams, should start that way. It's like, hey, let's just do Scrum by the book, or let's do Kanban by the book, or whatever it is, right? Let's not mess with it. Let's get really good at executing this particular framework or series of practices or whatever. And then once we've kind of done this for a while and we've really done these practices, now we should really be conversant with them. We've really learned what this is about. We can appreciate them. And now we're ready. We've achieved enlightenment, and now we are ready to start messing with them. Now we are ready to decide if we need to have a daily Scrum or not. Now we're ready to decide if time boxes are good or if we should be doing Scrum at all. But here's the thing. In order to have a stage where the primary intent is to follow the rules, it assumes that there are rules, right? We're starting out with a rule set. We're starting out with a pre-existing set of movements that we have to adhere to. Where did those rules come from? Well, I would contend that if we find ourselves in a stage where our first instinct is, well, let's just get good at this rule set, or let's just get good at this framework, then that means that we've picked a framework. How did we pick that framework? How did we end up in a situation where we already have a rule set that is not our own, that is foreign to us, and now we have to comply to it? I think most of the time this happens because most teams start with Scrum. And this is not a ding on Scrum. If anything, it's a compliment. Scrum's marketing and certification mill machines have really done the trick. I mean, they are by far and away the dominant force in Agile frameworks and in organizations trying to go Agile, so much so that many times people do not realize there is a difference between being Agile and doing Scrum. Those are synonymous. A lot of times when people ask about integrity-inspired solutions, I'll tell them we're an Agile shop and they want to know things like how long are our sprints? Well, we don't do Scrum. We don't do sprints. And they find this very confusing. But there's sort of this unspoken conventional wisdom that when a team is just starting out, we should just have them do Scrum. You know, get them going. Sometimes people even say Scrum makes good training wheels for Agile, because it provides a set of practices, a set of cohesive practices right out of the box. Scrum tells you how long your meetings have to be. It tells you which ones to have, what roles to have, what those roles' responsibilities are. I'm sorry, the accountabilities, which often get turned into roles. Sorry, I didn't want to get a bunch of angry emails from Scrum people next week. So it's accountabilities and events, not roles and meetings, but a lot of times that's the form they take. And it spells a lot of things out for you. And so organizations are like, cool, here's the rules. I'm going to do the rules and I'm going to keep the rules and magic is going to happen. But what they haven't done is talked about, why do we want to do Scrum in the first place? Is Scrum even a good fit for what we're trying to do? Because folks, I promise you, Scrum was not designed to be Agile training wheels. It was not designed as a framework to be a starter kit for being Agile. It was designed to be competitive and innovative in a marketplace flooded with products that are just like yours. And so how do you make your product differentiatable in a marketplace like that, while at the same time developing it at speed with high quality? That's what Scrum is about. And if that's your situation, it's a great thing to try. I mean, it might fit your team great. If that's not your situation, that's what Scrum was primarily built for. It wasn't built to be a generic Agile framework. It wasn't built to be, the Fisher-Price baby's first Agile event. It wasn't meant to be any of that stuff. But a lot of times teams start out there. And once you decide to start out that way, yeah, Scrum is a rule set. And if you don't do the rules, you aren't doing Scrum. But oftentimes that's how it starts. And we haven't even started by thinking about what are the outcomes that we want. When we say we need to be more Agile or we need to change our software development operations, what are the outcomes? Is the outcome we need our product to compete in a market flooded with similar products? If that's not the outcome, then you need to think long and hard about whether Scrum is a great fit for what you're trying to do. Is it just, well, we need to be more efficient, or we need to pay more attention to our customers, or we need to collaborate more, or we've got too many silos, or we have too many inefficiencies, between the ideation and the delivery of our product. If any of those are your outcome, then you need to start there and then start thinking about what sets of practices are going to get you there. You don't start out with a rule set and then be like, let's spend the next 6 months to a year getting good at this rule set and magic's going to happen. That's just not the way it works. The reason that's not the way it works is because there's just not any value in following the rules for their own sake. Now, if you've read the Scrum Guide has a little bit of alarmist language to this effect in it. It says at the beginning that Scrum is immutable, and if you change any of it, then any of the benefits you were hoping to get out of Scrum are now in jeopardy. Like it directly says that. Basically, if you mess with this at all, if you're if your daily scrum is 17 minutes instead of 15 minutes, then it's probably not going to work. You're going to lose all your benefits. I think that language is a little too hyperbolic a lot of times. I think most teams out there that are agile in some way are doing some practices or some things similar to what you might see in Scrum teams. For instance, a lot of my teams, even though we don't do Scrum, we have a regular retrospective, for example, and we get benefit from that. We haven't thrown ourselves into the abyss of valueless hell because we don't do all of Scrum or something like that. But there's no value in just following the rules to follow the rules. The question is it getting you where you need to go? Are you achieving the outcomes that you wanted to achieve, right? So this mindset that there's value in following the rules for 6 months or following the rules for a year, and then we'll be in a position of knowledge. Then the master will have shown us the way. They will have explained what we're supposed to do. We will have grasped intuitively agile principles just by doing Scrum over and over and over again. And now we can start making decisions about whether we should do Scrum or not, or what practices we should hold on to, or how we might change them to fit our situation or whatever. I just don't think it works that way. There's just no value in doing the rules to do the rules. You don't need to. If you're starting with outcomes, and if you're already critically examining what things are going to get us there, what value do we hope to get out of these practices, then you pick practices that line up with those values. You pick practices that operate according to those principles and get you where you want to go, and you evaluate its effectiveness against those outcomes. Now, in fairness, sometimes those practices are not getting you where you need to go because you suck at them. I've been teaching martial arts for a long time, and I remember very clearly the day that I had a brand new student show up. We were doing practicing a particular technique, and after 3 or 4 repetitions, he just quit. I asked him why he quit, and he said, well, Bruce Lee said that with any martial arts style, you keep what's useful and you get rid of the things that aren't. I said, yeah, but he was Bruce Lee. You're not Bruce Lee. The reason this technique isn't effective for you is because you suck at it. But if you were to practice it and you were to get better at it, you might find that you were actually pretty good with it and it was actually pretty useful. So in fairness, I do want to acknowledge that side of the fence. A lot of times, agile practices are uncomfortable. They challenge us. We're not good at them because of institutional and cultural patterns that have entrenched themselves in our organizations, and they fight against agility. So it seems like a practice isn't working, when really what's happening is it's challenging the other things in the ecosystem that also need to change in order for it to be as effective as it could be. So that is a real thing. But even acknowledging that doesn't change the fact that just following the rules to follow the rules does not magically bring you any benefits, nor does it guarantee that you're going to be getting the things that you need to get. In fact, I would say there's a lot of organizations that have been sold a bill of goods by thinking that if we just do Agile Framework X, then magic will happen, right? Our problems will go away if we just do the framework. And they focus on the framework. And then when the framework fails to save them, they swap it out for another framework. I mean, how many times have you heard about teams doing Scrum and they ditch it for Kanban because they're like, hey, Kanban's lighter weight and, Scrum is really holding us back, so we'll do Kanban now. And then they run into the exact same problems. Well, why? Because it was never about following the rules. It was about the fact that they weren't changing the things that needed to change. And it doesn't matter what rule set you picked. It was just not going to happen, right? There's just not a lot of value in just following the rules for their own sake. But the main reason that I think it's not super healthy to start out with let's just follow the rules for a certain period of time and then we will start being self-critical about what we're doing is we execute the rules better when we understand what we're trying to get out of them or what we're trying to accomplish. I'll give you another martial arts example. I had an Eskrima teacher once, and his whole thing was, I just want you to mimic me, like a robot. Just do everything exactly the way I do it. It's the way I learned, and it's the way you're going to learn as well. And I tried that, and I would try to mimic him exactly what he was doing. It's like Mr. Miyagi. There was no explanations, right? There was no larger principle. There was no larger goal that we talked about that we were trying to aim toward. It's just do these practices, do these movements over and over and over again. And as I would do them, he would correct me. And he would say things like, hey, when you're doing that motion, your hand's too low. your hand's too low, your hand's too low. And I would, start to hike it up, start to hike it up, start to hike it up until I got to the height that he wanted, I guess. And then much later, when we were talking about these movements, he said, okay, this is a thrust to the throat. This is a shot at the throat. If I had known that at the beginning, I would have known how high to hold my hand, right? If he had just said, okay, your hand is too low because we're trying to hit the other person's throat. So you need to aim for the throat. I would have known how high to hold my hand, right? But because we were focused on the movements and doing the movements right, and that was the whole world, I never got that. It was the most inefficient way to teach those things, whereas if I had known what the goals were, it would have affected the way that I performed those motions. And I would say that's true of almost any martial art. When you know the application of the movement, when you know the goal, when you know what you're trying to get to, it affects the way you do those motions. It makes them more effective. It makes them more closely aligned to the goal, as opposed to you just trying to mimic what you've seen someone else do and not knowing why. I mean, imagine trying to learn anything that way. Imagine if I tried to teach you how to play chess. And let me tell you, product development has some similarities to playing chess. And all I did was say, here, watch how I move my pieces. Now move your pieces the same way. And we just did that over and over and over and over again. Would you learn to play chess? No, you wouldn't learn to play chess. Maybe, if we're lucky, after seeing the movements 8 million times, you might be able to divine some of the rules of how the pieces could and couldn't move. And maybe after you've seen us mimic out and mock out dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of games, you might begin to slowly fathom the rules and the strategies and things like that around chess. Or I could just tell you, right? I could just tell you, this is how rooks move, this is how pawns move, this is how bishops move. Now, you're not going to learn to play chess by me just explaining it to you, but it's going to change the way you play the game. It's going to get you there much faster, and you're going to understand, oh, that's why he didn't move that piece there, because pawns can capture diagonally. So that's why he's not moving it there. But if I don't explain that, you're going to have to divine that somehow. Think about any other activity, teaching you how to fish. What if I just made you, here, watch what I do, and I'm not going to explain anything to you. I'm not going to tell you any principles. Just do these movements. And now bring your wrist back like this. Now throw your wrist back out like, you have to have the practices for people to learn for sure. But the practices are subservient to the principles that make them work, to the mindsets, right? To the laws of the universe that you are embodying in these specific practices. I'm not saying that you can intellectualize someone into agility, but you can't just practice your way into agility either. And if people know the why behind what they're doing, if they know the principles, then it's going to affect what they do. So let me give you a quick example before we close our time together today. I want you to think about like the daily stand-up or the daily scrum if you're doing scrum. And I want you to think about all the teams out there, maybe a team you've even been a part of, maybe even a team you're on right now, where you are doing something that is not very effective. You're going around the circle and you're saying, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And what are your roadblocks? Or your daily stand-ups are just a status report, or developers aren't even coming to them, right? Because they're a waste of time, or people are opting themselves in and out. Think of the way those things look. Now, do you think that that situation would improve by doing it over and over and over and over again? And if you were to come to me and say, hey, these daily stand-ups are not valuable, we want to quit doing them. And I have said, no, we're in the shoe stage right now. Keep the rules, right? Keep having the daily stand-ups. Just keep doing them. Keep doing those stand-ups. But what if I told you, listen, the point of the daily stand-up is not to have a daily stand-up. The point of the daily stand-up is for the team every day to look at what's going on with their work and make a plan of attack for the day as a team, right? So they're going to look at all the work that's in progress. They're going to look at where they're trying to get to, and they're going to decide as a team what they're going to do today. So you got to be at the stand-up because your voice has got to be in there. You've got to help your team look at the landscape and make mission-critical decisions about what you're going to do that day to address the situation on the ground. And if you're a Scrum team in specific, then this is all done in light of the sprint goal, right? If we've got a sprint goal to accomplish, what do we need to do today to make sure that that goal is not in jeopardy? Now, if you know that's the purpose of the stand-up, does it change the way you do the stand-up? Does it change the questions that you ask? Does it change the format? Does it change the value? Does it change people's perceptions of value and their willingness to participate? I would argue that it does. That knowing those things makes your daily stand-ups or your daily scrums far more effective because you know the principle behind it, you know the outcome that you're shooting for, and that's going to shape the way you conduct the practice. If instead of doing those things, I said, well, just keep doing a daily stand-up. We got to follow the rules. Scrum Guide says we got to do a daily scrum. Let's do it. Let's do it. And then after we've done it for a year and you've really embodied, the totem animal spirit of having daily scrums, then you'll be in a position to decide if the daily scrum is effective or useful, bringing us the value or accomplishing the goals that we want for it. So anyway, I hope this has at least been thought-provoking. Again, please don't hear me wrong. I'm not suggesting that we don't practice, and I'm not suggesting that we intellectualize our way into Agile or martial arts for that matter. I mean, the only way to fight is to fight, but at the same time, I think this thinking that the best way to get teams into agility is to have them adhere to a rigid set of rules over and over and over again until the day that they finally get it or the day it finally sinks in or whatever. I don't think that's the best way forward either. I would recommend for your organization that you start with outcomes, you start with principles, and you select the practices or entire frameworks, if that's your thing, that align with the outcomes and the values and the principles that you're trying to embody, and you change them when they don't seem to be doing that for you. I just don't think there's a lot of value, nor is it very efficient to just keep doing a rule set over and over and over just because. Magic is just not going to happen. It's not like a cookbook. It's not like a recipe. That's not the way any of this works. So I really encourage you right from the get-go, what are the outcomes that you want to accomplish with increasing your agility, and what are going to be the practices that are going to fit your desired outcomes and your situation. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.